already getting into it this morning. And even as we do, let's talk about education a little bit. CT, when you think about a university education, you think, okay, I want to be able to go outside the country. What are some of the things that you think, okay, even for people that you heard, that you want to say, I'm not going to do this. I've heard stories, people have been scammed. What are some of the things that stop you from even going there and say, let's just stick with what we have?
What often happens is when people think of higher education, they think, okay, then after that education, then what? If you look at our education system and the way we are wired, it should lead to a job, quite simply. And if jobs don't come begging, then I ask the question, why do I bother in the first place? But then on the other hand, a lot of it has to do with how we structure our educational system, because education is not meant to open your eyes to getting a job. It's supposed to enable you to be able to understand how it is you can use your abilities to help yourself suitably engaged. But our system in this country doesn't quite do it.
Indeed.
Yes.
So when you're looking for it and you're saying, okay, I want to go abroad now and I want to see how I can explore horizons out there, most times you're not really sure. Where do I start?
Actually, you are stumped.
Which country do I go to?
You're stumped. You wouldn't even know where to begin.
Exactly.
Yes.
Which course do I pick?
But there are people who know what to do.
There are. They're called Cradle. Now, Cradle has seen this problem in the market and they said, you know what? Most times people want to go out of the country. They don't even know where to begin. Which country will offer the course that you want? Which university probably is best suited for you? So they said, we're going to take all this information and we're going to use technology to match you with the proper university. We want to match you in the right country and probably in the proper course whereby it's going to help you to solve some of the things that you talk about, CT. And for them to attend to all these people at the same time, they said, you know what we're going to do? We are going to have the World Study Abroad Fair that will take place on the 31st of August. That's this Saturday. And they've said, universities from many different countries will be there. The UK, the US, Grenada, Cyprus, New Zealand, Ireland. The list goes on and on. So you can come in, talk to these guys because they will be there. You can apply for admission on the spot. You can apply for scholarships right there. You can have a visa consultation and also look for accommodation and housing. You would go at 11 o'clock and most probably leave at 4 with everything that you need intact. And they've said, come on down to the Gallant Mall on the 31st of August from 11 to 4 and get all of these things in line. And it works for you. All you need to do is register.
It's important.
www.cradle.com or call 0799 000 444. All right. We're getting into conversations for today. And our guest is here this morning. And we're going to be looking at it's Katiba Day, of course, looking at 14 years after the promulgation of the Constitution. And the future of the 2010 Constitution is what we're discussing this morning. And our guest, Oliver Waindi, who's the Executive Director of Uraia Trust, here this morning. Oliver, good morning.
Morning to you.
Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
A lot to discuss 14 years after the promulgation. Today is Katiba Day. Many questions being asked. But before we get into it, since you're here in the hot seat to talk about such things, let's tell you today's proverb. CT has these proverbs. He'll let you know what that is, and then you can tell us what it means to you, how you would interpret it. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the People's Republic of Algeria. Not just Republic, People's Republic. The proverb: there is an excess of familiarity at the root of all hostility.
Absolutely. I mean, it's basically what we want to discuss this morning, because when you're familiar to somebody, the most likely person to take advantage of you is normally the person that is very familiar to you. And that is possibly what we want to look at this morning, because I think the 54 million Kenyans in this republic probably have been taken advantage of by people that they're very familiar with. So I think it's really spot on. So it's not only Algerian. I think it's rooted in Algeria, but I think it's a very Kenyan scenario indeed. Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, interesting. So here we are, 14 years after the promulgation of the Constitution 2010. And there are many questions already. Full implementation of the Constitution, is it even possible? Or are we saying, have we even started to abide by the tenets of the Constitution and seen that working through Kenya? Even as we go into some specific questions and then point in some areas, an overview of how Kenya has done with its most recent constitution. It's 14 years down the line. Today was the day when that huge flag was hoisted, right, over Uhuru Park. And they said this is the supreme law now, and this is how Kenya will be governed. How has Kenya done under that constitution, in your opinion, Oliver, in the last 14 years?
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think we should just look at it exclusively in the context of 14 years per se, but we can stretch history back to where we've come from. And indeed, when you look at it from the history of this country, where we were until that wonderful day on 27th of August 2010, again to date, then you will see the progress we've made as a country. It is very easy to be clouded and to be blinded by the challenges we have currently and think that probably we've not made any progress. However, if you look at it where we were, for those who were there in the 1960s, like you, and those who grew up in the 70s and 80s, then you do understand that the terrain was much rougher for Kenyans when it comes to constitutionalism. And because of the setbacks that we had as a country, then, of course, we did what we did in the 2000s, and we got our constitution in 2010. Now, from 2010, of course, we got this wonderful constitution, which has really been globally acclaimed. The challenge, of course, we have is then how have we gone insofar as the implementation of the same is concerned. And indeed, I must say that the promise that we had with the constitution and the performance that we've had, the gap is absolutely glaring. And that's what we ought to address as a country. Yes.
You know, when you say that, as you're speaking, when you talk about the 60s, you'd be surprised at where my mind went to. I actually began my early schooling in my neck of the woods, the original place we came from. It's a place called Katolo. It's in a place called Nyando. And I went to a primary school called Yogo Primary School. Now, Yogo Primary School, there were two sessions. There are those who went to school in the morning, then there are those who went to school in the afternoon. I was the group of people who went to school in the afternoon. And the reason was there were only two classes. And some people learned under a tree. And we walked to school barefooted. And I was thinking, my parents had bought us shoes, my sister and I, but we couldn't wear it because some of our teachers didn't have shoes. Okay? Now, I was thinking of relatives who wore shoes for the first time when they were in their adolescence. And the shoes gave them a problem because their feet had been accustomed to walking without shoes. And this constitution and applying it to our life reminds me of that. When you've been used to doing things the way we were socialized, and then you bring in this new thing which tries to now make lives better, the shoe is supposed to protect your foot, but you're used to walking without shoes. So the shoes now, as you put them on, become a problem instead of being what it is. So as you said that, that's what came to my mind. Shoes for the first time in your adolescence, when you haven't been wearing it, and the process of getting your feet used to wearing the shoes. That, in my opinion, is the analogy I can draw with the Constitution and how we Kenyans are.
Absolutely. What you're trying to say is that probably the speed with which you were expecting to implement it to bring the change that, like you're saying it, we were walking barefoot until 27th of August. All of a sudden we get these shoes. And then we find it too beautiful, too comfortable. And like you're putting it rightly, in the 60s then you even had fear of actually putting on that shoes. Probably that's what we've experienced as a country because we had schedules, we had everything, and our expectation was that by now would have made extremely big strides in so far as the implementation is concerned. Now, the fact that that has not been the case, I don't know if it's by design or it's just by some default, but we find ourselves here. And that is what we need to interrogate as a generation, as a country, at such a time like this.
Is there a need to celebrate this day?
Absolutely, absolutely. Remember, the challenges we are experiencing are very teething, and the sentiment on the ground, as they say, is that the Kenyan people on the ground are really enthusiastic about this constitution. That alone is a reason to celebrate it. Now, when we have people in power who are supposed to implement it and who are inherently declining to do what the constitution wants, they're the minority. And I think the majority ultimately will have the success over this constitution. So we've got every reason to celebrate it. And indeed, even with the challenges that we've had, it's important also to just celebrate the milestones that we've achieved. The devolution that we've had in this country, the freedom that we can even discuss this. Those are liberties that have been given to us by this constitution that we indeed need to celebrate. So we've got a lot of things to celebrate. However, we set the bar so high in terms of our expectation, and the fact that we've not necessarily achieved the high expectation that we wanted with this constitution, that is where the frustration comes in.
Let me ask you,
Yeah.
is it not a good thing to set a high bar?
It is absolutely a very, very good thing.
Yes.
But I think the infrastructure must allow you to achieve that high bar. But as it is right now, clearly, that has not been the case in terms of putting structures to achieve that high bar success. And that is what is bothering us. First as a sector, second as a country, third as a generation. People are getting almost discouraged, if I may use the more diplomatic word, why we can't be what we ought to be by 2024.
But did we understand, or did somebody who probably understands these things better give us a roadmap and tell us what it is that we were going to undergo before we actually achieve what was and still is aspirational?
Well, let me just say that change is not so easy to get in anything, whether it's at a personal level, institutional level, country level, or even generational level. Change is a very, very hard thing to do. Good or bad, change is a very difficult thing to achieve. Because you've got status quo and you've got people who have benefited from status quo. And therefore, they always want to perpetuate the same. And therefore, the real challenge we have right now is the desire for the majority of Kenyans to get this thing implemented and to get a better life. And there are people who find that extremely difficult, because when you get a liberated people who can have a better say in a better life, then they want to be very easy to control in terms of politics. And I think that is where the dilemma is. It's a huge conundrum as a country that we're facing right now. Those who are holding on to the status quo and don't want to have full implementation of this constitution, and the desire of the 54 million of us in this territory called Kenya to get to implement this constitution. That is the conundrum.
Well, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Today I'm talking a great deal because this thing is important to me. There's a disconnect between what we have on paper and what is promised, and getting the people to actually believe that it is possible for it to happen. Because sometimes the pushback is not visible. There is a term that is used by psychologists. They call it a passive-aggressive approach to something. Somebody says yes, but they're not moving. Said, yes, I am coming, but they haven't moved an inch. When you have lofty ideas like the ones we have in our constitution, and yet people have what we call their lived reality, to connect the two sometimes is a bit of a problem, because people tend to rely on what they're used to, what they're accustomed to seeing. They're comfortable with it. Even if it is something that isn't necessarily good for them, they're comfortable with it. So when you want to move them from there, they're hesitant. They're not sure. But what I'm also not sure of is, one, do we know the efforts that must be made to get people to be sure, or at least begin that journey? Do we also know what it is that we need to do in minute details to begin this process so that people can actually see this change incrementally? I dare say we've seen change, but do we communicate that what we see and what we now take for granted is the change that we're talking about? It's just that it may not have come packaged the way we would have preferred it or wanted it to be packaged, and yet the change is actually with us, as you correctly put it. That we're having this discussion itself is a huge change.
Absolutely. You are right. Maybe it's the packaging, maybe it's the communication. But I think ultimately, the reason I'm putting on this shirt today is because symbolically, this is what we call in this country Wanjiko. And this actually means that everything that we do, the person that ought to understand, the person who ought to partake everything that we do as a country, and those who are privileged to be in positions of power and ensuring that the constitution is successfully implemented, is this person. So if you have an implementation that is not appreciated on the ground, then that implementation itself is faulty in a way. And so it doesn't matter whether it is well communicated or well packaged. Ultimately, and that's why we begin by talking about the sovereignty of the people of this republic. The central person to this is the citizen. Actually, that's where the word Uraia is coming from.
Yeah.
It's Uraia, it's the Raia who ought to actually partake of what everything is. So it's not about the presidency explaining to us what has been achieved in terms of it is the least of us who must understand that this thing has impacted him or her. If that is not the case, then there's a problem, either in the packaging, like you're saying, or in communicating that success or otherwise. Yeah.
So what are some of the activities that we see or that you've been involved in that would then point directly to ensuring that, number one, the citizen, even if it is at the very basic level, has understanding of what this constitution is and how you can then insist on the implementation of it by those who've been given the responsibility? What are some of the things that we see that gets us closer to that mark?
Well, let me just say, and Ken is a lawyer, he knows that better than me, that it is the responsibility of the government to actually carry out civic education. Civic education is basically educating the masses on their rights and responsibilities in this country. So it is the role of the government. However, we supplement it in our sector. So we actually carry out civic education, trying to help Kenyans understand what their rights are and indeed what their responsibilities are as well. Now, once a population is well educated on its rights and responsibilities, sooner or later they will start to do the right things, demand for their rights, but as well get accountable for the actions of demanding for the rights. So what we have seen, for example, of the past few months specifically, and indeed much longer before, we are seeing agitation. That in itself is a manifestation that Kenyans are getting aware of what their rights are. You have seen the Gen Zs from the 25th of June this year, and when they're arrested, they proudly display our Constitution booklet and saying, no, this is not right according to the Constitution. None of them is a lawyer. Because, again, we have to debunk this and demystify that the Constitution is a legal document. This is a contract between those who are in leadership and the 54 million Kenyans.
Yes.
And we want it to be operationalized and be understood by the least of us. One of the challenges, again, that we've had over the past 14 years is the assumption that, only lawyers ought to understand this and then interpret it on our behalf. And we want to really make this simple, widespread, to permit every corner of this country, just asking people to be responsible citizens, upholding their rights, demanding what is rightfully theirs, but at the same time, carrying out their duties as responsible citizens of this country. Now, I am glad to say that we are gradually seeing that getting manifested in our country, both in terms of people partaking the processes that we have, even democratic processes. Okay, we've had issues of less and less people participating in election, which we're trying to address through civic education. But we are glad that more and more people are now getting bolder in demanding for what they think is their right. Now, we saw it in the town hall 2 days ago when university students were telling the president, no, we are not okay with this new university model. Now, I don't know the viability of that. All what I know is that when a young 22-year-old stands and tells the president, I disagree with you on that, that alone tells you that there is more awareness in terms of what people believe is the right. And that is what makes me happy as a person and makes me happy as a Kenyan, that we are getting a generation that can hold people accountable and can ask for what is rightfully theirs.
There have been some accusations that have come from government in terms of involvement by non-governmental organizations when it comes to some of the things that you talk about. Civic education, number one. And like you said, it's a purview of government. But then you've been filling the holes. But there seems to be wide gaping holes in terms of some of these things. So there has been direct accusation from government that, you know, non-governmental organizations are poking their nose where it doesn't concern them. What's your take on that, and how ought it to be?
Well, like he said at the beginning, change is very hard to get. And when change is brought, it's going to cause a lot of disquiet and discomfort to those in power. That is not something that they would want to see. The sector that I work in is probably one of the most patriotic sector you can ever get, because all what we want is the best for this country. Nobody in his right senses would want to destroy a country that he is or she is in by God's own design. So, I mean, it would be very foolish of any of us to do that. We want the best for our country. But when we do that, the only way to do it is to make it very uncomfortable for people who don't want us to have a good country. And when you make it uncomfortable, and they have continuously benefited from the chaos and the ugly side of the implementation of this constitution, they will be in the forefront of saying that you are not necessarily doing what they want, which is what they want, not what the constitution wants and what the Kenyans want. So, yes, I am aware that we have been accused variously of not necessarily being very patriotic and always dancing to the tune of the outsiders, which is really far-fetched. What we want and what we do is to ask Kenyans to be responsible citizens. And, you know, in Oraya, for example, which is the lead organization when it comes to civic education, the only gospel we preach is that we are all here by God's design. It is your responsibility to make Kenya better for all of us. So you've got rights that you must demand, but you also have got duties and responsibilities that you ought to uphold as citizens of this country. Now, if that is bad gospel, then I don't know what is. Yeah, because all what you're telling Kenyans is, please don't do anything that you're not supposed to do, but do everything that you ought to do.
Supposed to do.
Now, if that is agitation, well, I think I'm in the presence of a lawyer. You can tell me whether that is an agitation. But nobody in his right senses would be happy when status quo is getting changed.
Okay, let's take a break on that note and come back, and maybe the lawyer can contribute to that conversation and let us know what would that actually look like. It's Katiba Day today, the 27th of August, 14 years after the promulgation of the new constitution. Is it still new? Can we still say it's new 14 years down the line? Or most recent constitution? Oliver Waindi is the executive director of Uraiya Trust, and we're having a conversation today and saying, okay, Constitution 2010, are we living it out? We're taking a break at this point, 28 minutes to 8 o'clock. We come back and we continue with this conversation.